We are back with Mr. Fred Bernhardt of Walker, Michigan for the second part of his interview. Now, Mr. Bernhardt, one of the things that we talked about when we first met, at least before we were on camera, was how you wound up with a set of photographs taken by a Marine Corps photographer from Saipan. Can you tell me about that, or how you got those pictures? Or?
Well, they were made available to anybody that was there. I mean, anybody in our division. And if you wanted them, there was a small cost involved, and so you would put your name in, and then you'd get a set of them. But those pictures were all done by the Marine Corps photographers, the combat photographers. Yes.
Right. And those are ones that we have in your collection for
That's the ones you
archive.
have the copies from.
Now, I think you'd mentioned that you were actually in one of those. There was a picture.
There is one in where I am in it, but I was more from a side back view.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So because I remember when the photographer was there, because at that particular instant, we were being bombarded by Japanese mortars, and I turned around and he was climbing up this hill, and I says to him, "Get back down behind that rock. It's dangerous." But he didn't pay attention to me. And he kept on coming up, and he got killed.
Well, that was the war correspondent. I was talking about the Marine Corps photographer, the guy who sold you the pictures on Saipan.
Oh, well, the Marine Corps photographers, you say, yeah. Well, they were assigned to us, you know, just like a part of the division.
Right.
Huh?
Yeah. And the pictures in that set, I mean, most of them were from fighting that went on the island before you got there. But there was one picture in that set that showed a native woman and a child and so forth in a hut. And
well, now those were taken when we were there.
Right, right. And so that was the one where at the time you said you were one of the Marines that was in that picture.
Right.
Okay, so just kind of verify that part. Now, while the war was going on, did you have a camera with you?
No, we weren't allowed to.
Okay.
And you couldn't have got any film anyway, even if you had a camera. But no, it was not allowed.
Right. Okay. Now, when you got to Japan, though, you had a camera. How did you get a camera?
Well, I bought it from a Japanese. And he had a studio. He was a professional photographer, but he couldn't get any film. The cameras were worthless. Well, he had this German Zeiss Icon camera, and I wanted it, and he didn't want it. So we negotiated, and finally I bought it from him, and I kept that camera. It took 120 film, a standard film that Kodak made, and I used that camera for a good many years. It had a beautiful lens. It was all German made. And then finally I traded it off for a brand new camera when I got into the photography business, see.
Okay. Now, how did you meet this Japanese photographer?
Well, every day I would go to these towns, and I'd spend all afternoon there. And of course, we were there to keep our eye on some of our own men, that they didn't get in any trouble.
Right.
So that was what we did. We just patrolled those towns every day for 4 hours. And if you wanted to stay there after your shift was done, you could. And you could go sightseeing or whatever you want to do. And that's how I met a lot of those Japanese. But most generally, if they could speak any English at all, they would come up to you and say hello or how are you or something in English. And then if you could, I could speak a little Japanese, and between the two of us, we could get along and know what the other one was saying. That was the way it went.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about this photographer friend of yours. I mean, what was he doing for a living if he couldn't take pictures?
Well, that was it. He wasn't making much of a living. And anyway, when I wrote back to my parents, and I said, gee, this photographer friend of mine here, and he said, they said, kid, if you can get any film at all, send it to me, as much of it as you can get, and I'll pay you for it when I get home. So they sent, I don't know, maybe half a dozen rolls of film, because it was not all that plentiful here yet, because the war had ended, and Kodak was more geared to making film for the service, in the Army and Navy and everything, so then they finally got to making it back for the civilians. So I didn't really have an awful lot of film, but whatever I could do, that's the way I got it. Well, then I had this German camera, which the film would fit, and that's the way I got the pictures.
Okay. Now, you had in your set of pictures that we've put into the archive a number of pictures of Nagasaki itself.
The what?
Of Nagasaki.
Oh, yes.
Now, when did you get those? Was it?
When did we get there?
Yeah. Was that while you were based in Obama? Did you go back and look at it again?
No, we landed at Nagasaki first. Right. Now that was about. It was after they decided there wasn't enough radiation there to hurt you, but nobody could prove there was or wasn't. I sometimes wonder if I'm radioactive or not. But no, we had to wait till that radioactivity was down, and then we went to Nagasaki first, my particular division. And we stayed in Nagasaki for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Well, then they took some of us and sent us over here, some was sent over here, and that's how I got over in this part of the peninsula.
So you're based mostly in Obama.
Yeah, I stayed mostly at Obama because we had nice hotels there.
Right.
Yeah, these are pictures of what looked like inside, even though that's the Japanese rooms. This is the layout of the 3-story, but there was a very nice hotel, and we had all Japanese cooks, waiters. They did all the dishes. Well, there was only probably 30, 40 of us there.
Okay. Well, what kind of food did the Japanese cooks make?
Oh, I always liked it. Sardines and rice. And I just loved it. Smoked sardines. Oh, I just loved those sardines. And most of the other guys, they didn't really care that much. But I liked that rice. I liked the sardines. Well, then they had sukiyaki, which is a vegetable. There wasn't an awful lot to eat. I mean, there was no big variety, no big menu. Bread was unheard of, except we had bread in our mess hall at the hotel. The Marines did, but you didn't find bread out in the town.
Okay, so you had did you have a Marine mess hall with Marine cooks and the usual food there?
Well, we used the kitchen of the hotel. See, that's what but they had Japanese cooks too. See, we had our own cook. He kind of oversaw everything.
Right.
And that stuff was cooked the way we like it. And but no, it was very good. The food was excellent.
Yeah, and so I guess being a little more adventurous, that would help you when you went out and were traveling around and visited people.
Yeah, I like Japanese food. Oh, I love it. I got pretty good pair of chopsticks too. Yeah. But the big staple was rice and sardines, fish, which of course they were right out of the ocean, so the fish was plentiful.
Okay. Now, describe a little bit the facilities up at the resort town of Unzen. That was where you were.
What is this now?
Unzen.
Yeah, Unzen is a big resort town. It would be like going to Charlevoix. And beautiful big hotels. All the rooms were, well, not the room, but each floor had one of these big sulfur baths. And like I say, they were about 20 feet long, 10 foot wide. Hot, 140 degrees, come right out of the ground, and it was refreshing to say the least. But like I say, you had to know how to get in the water, and you had to accustom yourself with it. They helped you. The Japanese would take care of that. And the funny thing of course is all girls. We didn't have, there was no Japanese men. All that was all done by young girls. They were 16, 17 years old, and that was their job. And they didn't care if you didn't have any clothes on. They didn't make no bones about it.
Yeah, they'd seen it before.
No.
Yeah. So now, how does it actually work? If you're going to go and visit a bath, what's the process?
Well, you went into a small one, probably 6 or 8 feet square, 4 foot deep. And then they had a soap, got all soaped up, then take the water and pour it over you. And when you got all that soap rinsed off, then they would take the water out of that big tub, which was a lot hotter. And then they'd pour it on you until you got used to it, and then you could go in. Now, they used to think we were absolutely nuts, because we dive in. 4 foot of water, and we can dive in and belly flop, you know. They thought we were crazy to see a bunch of guys diving into a bathtub.
Well, were you about the only business they had? I mean, this is a big resort.
No. There were Japanese. The hotel was still partially used as a tourist attraction, or anybody that wanted to come in there, they could get a room if they had them. But we took up most of it, or at least we took up most of one floor. And we had our own kitchen and our own mess hall. I mean, our own Japanese cooks and servers.
Right. Well, who else would be coming in as tourists at that point? I mean,
Well, mostly citizens of the, you know, there was still work going on. There were salesmen that were traveling around. There was builders and artists and all kinds of musicians. And they were carrying on as though it was normal again, and they was getting back into it. And they had their orchestras, but of course, the music they played, the Sammy Sins and all that clankety clank music, you know. But it was interesting anyway. But they had a lot of they had stage shows, plays. It was all in Japanese, of course. We could pick up a little and know at least what they were talking about. But they had that. There was no movies. We were the only ones that had any movies at our hotel. We would get a film once in a while, an old black and white film, see, but better than nothing. But that was the way it was. The hotel, even though it was a little on the run-down side, it still was beautiful. You could see that in its day it must have been really something, you know.
Now, about how many of you were in your unit? That is,
About 30, 35, 40 maybe at the lowest.
And then, were there a lot of American personnel stationed around the area?
No, not within 60, 70 miles.
Okay. So your job as a military policeman is to kind of keep an eye on things, but it doesn't sound like you had that many people to keep an eye on.
You see, we did not interfere with the Japanese people themselves. They had their own police force. Boy, and they were tough. Those guys were tough. I mean, boy, a citizen didn't get away with anything, but they were right there. I mean, they were good. And all we had jurisdiction over was our own men. Well, of course, if somebody got in trouble, like if one of the Japanese or one of the Americans got in the ruckus, well then of course we were able to step in, but we did not interfere with their personal relationships at all.
Right. Now, did American soldiers ever have a run-in with the Japanese police?
Oh, I would have to say not. In my time there, I don't think I saw more than 2 or 3 times, and then it was mostly because somebody had too much to drink. But other than that, no. We never got in any trouble with traffic. You know, I mean, we had a lot of Jeeps flying around there, and you know, they always were going fast, but they didn't have speed limits, so nobody bothered anybody. There were no accidents. I can ever remember anybody running into anything, and it was quite calm. Once in a great while, right around the Japanese New Year, that was about a week after our New Year. And that's a real celebration. I mean, you can't walk down the sidewalk or the street, and everybody, at least every household, has got a big table, a big smorgasbord, tables 15 and 20 feet long, full of food and sake. And you just can't get away from it. They pull you right in the house. You gotta eat. Yeah, oh my gosh. After a while, you can't eat anymore, you know. But it was so good. Oh, I loved it.
Now, were there guys in your unit who really didn't like that?
Oh, there was some. Yeah, it was just like they didn't like some American food either. You know, so it's just your taste. But I liked it.
Okay. Okay, in the first interview, you mentioned that while most of the Japanese people were very nice and so forth, sometimes the Japanese soldiers or the former soldiers,
the discharged soldiers, those that had been in combat, they weren't so friendly.
how would they show that?
They wouldn't talk to you.
Okay.
I mean, you could walk down the sidewalk, and I would say, in Japanese, I would say, Ohio gozaimasu, good morning, how are you? They'd just keep right on walking. But the regular Japanese, he would stop and they'd bow to you, and they would give you the greeting back. See, and then they'd go on their way. Well, that was basically the difference. There was a few of them. That was reasonably good. I mean, they accepted us. And they would talk to you, but not very many of them, very few. I mean, no more than 2 or 3 that I remember.
Did you ever meet a Japanese soldier who was willing to talk about the war, or did the Japanese ex-soldiers ever talk about the war or any of that, or did they stay away from that?
No, not in so many words, no. They kept clear of that. The only ones the ones that could talk English, the one that in particular, we nicknamed him George, because that was an easy word to say. And he could speak fluent English, and he lived 20 miles across the bay from Nagasaki. And he could tell you when he saw that bomb go off, and you want to hear him describe that. It's just unreal what that must have been like. I mean, they had no conception of what that was.
Right.
They thought the end of the world was coming.
Now, of course, the Nagasaki was the second bomb. So had
Right.
they known about Hiroshima before that?
Well, yeah, they heard that, but they didn't see it, you know, and didn't experience it, and they saw some pictures of it, but have it actually happen, and the bomb that was at Nagasaki was even bigger than the one at Hiroshima. Yeah.
Now, did any of the men in your unit acquire Japanese girlfriends while they were there? Did they really fraternize, if you will? With,
Oh, you mean? No. No, as a matter of fact, most of the Japanese fathers that had young daughters, say 15, 16 years old, were trying to get the Americans to marry them. They wanted their daughters to come back here and live in the United States, and then sooner or later they could come over. See, that was what they wanted. So they were very friendly about you dating their daughters or something, because they wanted that. And you know, some of those Japanese girls are pretty. They're very nice, very well, and polite and everything, you know. And there were several guys that did that brought them back. I don't remember how many of them, but I'm sure that with all of the occupation troops, I only was involved with a few thousand of them, you know, but all over the whole country, Japan, there was probably a lot of romances that went on.
Okay. Now, can you describe a little bit sort of what your regular duties were? I mean,
What my duties were?
Yeah, because you mentioned not just being in one place, but you had to travel around.
Right. The main thing that we had to do was keep our men out of trouble.
Right.
And if there was trouble, we had to stop it. Now, if an American and a Japanese get in a disagreement with each other, then we would take our person away, and the Japanese police would take theirs away. And they weren't too kind with them either. I mean, the Japanese police were tough guys, really.
Now, how large an area did you have to cover?
Oh, now we had, if this area here, on the map here,
So from Nagasaki to Obama, for instance, how far would that be on the road?
well, Obama was a town about the size of, as big as Reed City. Oh, not as big as Lansing. But it was fair size. It was probably about like Grand Haven.
Okay.
And Unzen was about the same size. So there were not real lot. Of course, Nagasaki was was a huge city. That was a huge city, yeah. Even though the atom bomb destroyed a lot of it, there was a lot of it that was never touched, simply because of the way the terrain was. Nagasaki is a very hilly country. If you were on this side of the hill and the bomb landed over there, then you would escape from it. You know, there was no damage.
Now, in those areas of Nagasaki, did you have people still living in some of them and rebuilding and that kind of
Oh
thing?
yes, oh yes, that was, oh yeah, there was a lot of that going on, huh? But there was also a lot of it that wasn't damaged either, you know, so they had places to live, and there were places that they could make things and sell things and all that. Downtown area there was a pretty good district of downtown area that was untouched. But the bomb wasn't supposed to get the city, it was supposed to get the Mitsubishi aircraft and the shipyard, and that's what it did. But of course, you know, the force of the explosion and the radioactivity went far beyond where the explosion actually took place. But yeah, I was really surprised that the people weren't more antagonistic towards us than what they were. Most of them were very friendly. But like I say, you would get a few of these that had been in their army and navy, and they weren't quite so friendly. Okay. I don't know what today. I imagine it's just like any other country now. But since we were the first ones there, you know, it was a kind of a feeling out process. They didn't know whether they liked you, and you didn't know whether you liked them. But it turned out that I had a lot of good friends. Ate a lot of meals there, and yeah, we had a lot of good times.
Where you were, how much supervision did you have? Were there higher ranking officers telling you what to do?
But we didn't. There was very, only if there was some real trouble would they, you know, kick up a fuss over it. But to have somebody looking down your back all the time, no, that wasn't possible. The military police, like what we were, and we kept things pretty well under control. The officers took care of their business and the business of the company and the division, and so there wasn't, as I remember, an awful lot of trouble.
Now, were the officers and people that you were reporting to, were these people who had come out of civilian life like yourself, or did you have some who you thought were probably career people, or could you tell?
I don't know. You could tell. You mean, could I tell whether they had been in the? Yeah, I could tell. They had an air about them that was strictly military. They did things in quick motions and stopped, you know. I mean, if they were going to pick something up, it would be like something like that. It wouldn't be, pick it up, you know, look at it a little bit like we do. Yeah. Everything was done as snappy movements. And that you could tell. That's how I could tell that they had some military experience.
Now, were there very many of them?
Oh yes, there were quite a number. I couldn't say how many, but there were a lot of. Some of them still even wore the uniforms, or they wore the coat or the hat that they had when they were in the service. See, so yeah, you could spot them. Some of them were not too friendly. Matter of fact, most of the discharged soldiers and sailors, they weren't too friendly, but there was a handful that were.
Okay. Now, how long in total did you spend in Japan?
9 months.
Okay. And then how did you get back home?
On a troop transport. Yeah, see, I was still in the Marines, so when come time for me to go, I just got on board a troop transport and came back.
All right. And was that a quiet voyage, or what happened on the way back?
Oh, the usual. Being on those troop transports is no vacation, believe me. I mean, you sleep on cots that are stretched between a couple of poles, and usually they're 3 deep, high, and they're only about so wide, and they're canvas.
Right.
And then when you get in some rough water, you're lucky you don't get thrown out of it because it can get pretty rough. And so it's not a pleasant journey at all, believe me.
Right. Now, did they take you straight back to the States, or did you stop in Hawaii or anything?
No, we stopped they stopped in Hawaii to refuel. And then, otherwise it pretty much was a straight run. And the ship would go probably about 20 knots, about 25 miles an hour, something like that.
So about how long did it take to get home that way?
A month or more. God. I didn't like being on a ship, but I got seasick once, and then I never got seasick again. But I wasn't the only one either.
No. Now, where did you land in the States?
San Diego.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And then did you have to go back to a Marine base for a while? Or
Then I went from there to the Great Lakes Navy up here in Illinois.
Yeah. Chicago, yeah.
Upper Michigan, wherever it was, yeah. That's where I got my discharge from. Well, first, we landed down at Norfolk, that's right. We came in on Norfolk. Then we got a train. They took us to Great Lakes. And that all depends on where you were from. If you were from the Midwest, you went to Great Lakes.
Right.
And some of them went some other places, you know, some even went Florida, Texas, wherever. Yeah, that was the way it went.
Okay. And then what did you do once you got back?
Here?
Yeah.
Well, the first thing I did, I went around and visited all my old friends, you know. And I didn't even look for a job until about 2 months after I was here. And then my neighbor worked at American Seating Company at the time, and he said, "Say, Fred," he said, "they got some openings over at the seating company." He said, "You think you'd be interested in working?" And I said, "Well, I'll go over and see what it's like." He says, "Well, go ahead." So he told me what to see. And then I got a job up in the wood department. I ran a shaper and a router and saw and things like that. Now, I worked there about a year. I made good money, you know, with all union help and everything. Well, then I didn't really care about this high production. I mean, you did the same thing over and over and over. Well, then I got, there was an ad in the paper I happened to see one night, and help wanted at Lytle Iron Works was looking for apprentices to train for steel work. So I went down there and looked it all over, and I thought, yeah, I think I'd rather do that than what I'm doing now, because this is a lot more interesting. You do something different all the time, see? So that's what I did. I left American Seating, and I served a 4-year apprenticeship, and I got my journeyman's papers. And then during that 4 years, then I had to go to one night a week down to junior college, and we studied metallurgy and strength of materials and drafting and mechanical drawing and everything like that. And then when you got all through with that, then you had to take a final test from the state to get your journeyman's papers, see.
Now, what kind of things do they have you make there?
Oh, if it could be made out of steel, we made it.
Okay.
We built everything from elevators to escalators. We built parts for boilers. We built small boilers. We repaired big ones and small ones. We did a lot of structural steel work. Anything that can be done with iron, we could do it. High pressure vessels and tanks and all that kind of thing.
Okay, so you had a lot more variety to it.
Oh, yes.
Had to
What they would do, they would hand you a blueprint. And okay, you make this. Well, then you had to look at it, make a sub-cutting list out, and figure out all the things you had to do. If you needed a helper, they would give you one. And then you go ahead and make it. Some of those things took 2 or 3 months to build. Some of them took a year, some of those big jobs.
Okay, and then at what point did you get involved in photography then?
Well, I always did have an interest in it, in a very limited way. I had just a little small Brownie camera, and of course I bought all the photography magazines because there wasn't very many of them available then, but I read everything I could on it, and I took a lot of pictures, and then finally as I made more money, I bought better cameras, you know, and I joined the Grand Rapids Camera Club, and then I decided, well, some friends of mine says, well, yeah, could you take a picture of us, or take our family picture? Then, yeah, I'd try it. So I wouldn't charge them anything, you know. They all kind of turned out pretty good, you know. And the people said to me, why don't you do this for money? See, they said the pictures are beautiful and all that. So I thought, well, I'll try it. So then I signed up for the correspondence course in photography. And I passed that. And then I joined the Professional Photographers of America. And they had a school down in Indiana. And you could go to this school at certain times of the year for a week or two, whatever you wanted, what course ever you wanted to take. You could take commercial photography, advertising, portrait photography, wedding photography, whatever you want to do. You would sign up for that class. So I went down there 2 years in a row. I got to be pretty good then, after all some of the best photographers in the United States were instructors down there. See, they only did this instructing for a week or two out of the year because they had their own business to run. But as long as they were members of the association, would ask them if they would be interested in teaching a class for a week or two. That's how they got them.
Okay. All right. Now, I guess if you look back now on the whole sort of experience, I mean, how do you think that your time overseas wound up affecting the way you think or you look at things or whatever?
You know, I never would have got there otherwise. If I had enlisted on my 17th birthday, went down to the Marine enlisting, and 17th birthday, I was looking forward to that for about 3 or 4 months. How many more days yet before I can sign up? So I went down there and enlisted, yeah. And then about 3 weeks later, they called me to go to San Diego. But I wouldn't trade the experience for anything, because there's just no way I could have ever been to these places and did what I did unless I had done that, had enlisted and gone through it, through the war and then after the war, and it's just something you can't really describe to some people. You have to live it.
All right. Are there any other kind of miscellaneous things that you tend to remember or look back to out of that experience that you haven't mentioned?
Oh, let me think. I think that the biggest experience, or the one that was probably the most shocking, is boot camp. At least the Marine boot camp at that time was awful. It was just terrible. If you could get through that, you could get through most anything, because it was, it was tough.
Did they have a lot of people who washed out of that, or?
No, there was a few that went over the hill, but they usually caught them and then you had to put them in the brig, you know. But yeah, there was quite a few that figured they made a mistake. Yeah, you bet. And of course, I used to write letters. I'd write a letter home probably twice a week, you know, to my folks, and then they'd write me back and all that. Of course, there was always certain things my mom wanted to know, my mother and dad, but I couldn't tell them because it was censored.
Right.
Because some of my letters that I sent to them, well, they're all cut apart. All the words were taken out.
Right.
The sentences even.
Now, did that change after the war was over?
Oh yeah, after the war, you could say they didn't open the letters up. No, there was no censoring then. But during the war, no, they censored everything.
Well, did your parents want to know things like where you were and that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, now they didn't censor the incoming mail.
Yeah.
But only what you sent out.
Right.
You know, some people, I didn't have that. I never thought of it. But I remember a couple of guys that I was with, they and their family had signals. They would put certain words in sentences. Right. In other words, they would say, well, if you're in the South Pacific, you write to me and say that you saw Harry the other day, and the guy that used to live next door to us or down the street or something, right. And then they'd know what you said. See, they would transfer the meaning. I didn't do it because there was no need for it. My folks knew I was in the South Pacific. They knew that.
Right. Now, was the mail pretty regular during the war itself?
Well, no. you know, it was all done by ship.
Mm-hmm.
There was no aircraft. There was no airmail, and so it was a long time. It was at least a 30-day trip, say from California to the islands,
Mm-hmm.
and sometime more. And so the mail was very slow. I mean, my folks would send me a Christmas greeting, we'll say, and I'd get it about the first day of spring,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But no, it was you know, it was like I say, it was a lot of it was hectic, and a lot of it was what am I doing here? What did I ever sign up for?
Mm-hmm.
You know, but now I wouldn't have traded it for the world, because there's no way that an experience like that comes just in everyday life.
Mm-hmm. That's part of why we record the stories.
Yeah,
Most
and,
Americans
you
will never
know,
know what that's like.
And not only that, but the discipline that you had to adhere to was a education in itself. You just don't find that around here in the civilian life. Well, there probably is in some schools where they have courses where they have ROTC or the military courses, and then they have a strict regime too. But what we had was just like I say, it was only a once in a lifetime experience. Mm-hmm.
And it makes for a very good story.
Right?
So
yeah.
thank you very much for telling it to me.
Yeah. Well, I don't know of anything